If you like this story, give it a thumbs up and feel free to share it with others who you think might like it. So take a moment to relax, to close your eyes. And with your eyes closed as you listen along to me tell this story, I don't know whether you'll find yourself drifting deeper and more comfortably asleep with the words that I use, with the spaces between my words, or with the sound of my voice. And as you begin to relax and drift asleep, so I'll just tell this story in the background. And it's a story about a little kitten. And this kitten is sleeping in front of a fire. And with its eyes shut, breathing in and out, relaxing in front of that fire, the kitten can hear the crackling of that fire, can hear other sounds in the room, can feel the comfortable warmth of the fire. And while that kitten sleeps, so the kitten begins to twitch. And as the kitten begins to twitch, so they begin to drift into a dream. And the kitten twitches and drifts and floats into a dream, drifting and floating asleep in a dream, imagining themselves running around in a garden. And they're chasing after a ball, and they run around and jump on the ball, and they attack the ball, and they roll on their back with the ball. They flick the ball into the air, and then they catch the ball as it comes back down. They hold the ball with their front legs while kicking at it with the back legs and playfully biting at it, and then letting that ball go and running towards a tree and jumping up at the tree, grabbing onto the tree and shimmying up the tree, shimmying up that bark and climbing up to a branch. And then the kitten walks out on that branch, walks out on the branch above the leaves of that branch, walking all the way to the end of that branch, noticing how the branch sways more with each footstep, the closer to the end of the branch the kitten gets. And then at the end of the branch, the kitten slumps down and relaxes in that tree and just gazes out over the garden. Gazes out over that garden, feeling that slight swaying of the branch, feeling the breeze on their face, feeling calm and relaxed, having fun and then relaxing, and just watching the world go by from this point in this tree. And the kitten looks around and the kitten looks up, can see the tree extends much higher above them. And they see some children playing in the garden, playing with a ball. And they're curious watching those children, hearing the sound of the ball when it gets kicked, hearing laughter, feeling the cool breeze and the swaying of the tree, noticing the blue sky, the green grass, the way those children are having so much fun. And the kitten watches for a while, and then looks over into a garden over the fence and sees a couple of people lying back in chairs reading books in the sun. And looking the other way, sees someone down on the hands and knees doing some gardening, and notices how life is ticking by for all these people as they just relax in the tree. And they start to wonder what it would be like to go on a little adventure of their own. So they start looking around the branches of the tree, and they see that a few branches up, there's a branch that reaches over the back fence, the back of the garden. And off the back of this garden is a meadow and some woodland. And they decide that they want to go on a little adventure. So they climb up a bit higher in the tree. They climb up to that branch, carefully walk along that branch, walk over the fence, looking down at the other side. And they feel a bit high up, and they look down and they think about what that drop will be like. And they start wondering whether it's too high, whether they'll hurt themselves, because it looks higher than it really is. And they give it some thought, and then they start worrying and thinking they don't want to hurt themselves, they don't want to try. And they can see off in the distance in the meadow that there's some people running around throwing a stick for a dog. They can see birds flying over the woodland, and they're here, out on this branch, worrying about dropping down to the ground. And it's a bit higher than the fence, and they know that they've dropped down from the fence before. They've jumped down from the fence into the garden. But for some reason, being out on a limb makes it seem much further down. And then the kitten closes their eyes, focuses on breathing in and breathing out, making each out-breath longer than each in-breath, breathing in and breathing out. And the kitten relaxes its muscles, thinks about all the times it's jumped down from the fence, opens his eyes, and then lets itself drop down onto the ground below, landing in the grass below. And the grass is taller than the kitten, and the kitten crumples that grass as it lands safely on the ground. And tries to carefully walk through that grass. Tries to carefully walk with grass poking up into its nose, twitching its whiskers, poking into its belly. And it tries to push its way through that tall grass. And then the grass thins out a little, and the kitten starts walking out into the meadow, and the grass softens, and the kitten notices different meadow smells, different plants, notices the way that bees are just relaxed, flying from plant to plant. Butterflies are just relaxed, flying from plant to plant. And they just relax, walking through the meadow. And as they carry on walking through the meadow, so they hear a noise off to the side, a scurrying noise. And with curiosity, the kitten decides to investigate. The kitten walks through the long grass, pushes through the long grass to investigate the rustling noise. And then the kitten sees a little twitching nose and pushes and moves over towards this little twitching nose they can see through the long grass, and startles this creature. And the kitten doesn't know what it is, and the creature jumps back and curls up, and the kitten arrives at that creature and goes to nudge it with its nose, but as it does, it jumps back, as the fur on this creature seemed to stab it in the face. And the kitten's curious by this, and explores this creature, and carefully pushes the creature around, and the creature's like a ball. And the kitten pushes this creature around, trying to find out what it is. And then notices that this creature kind of has its own protection. It can curl up and have its spiky body protecting it. And so the kitten backs up and lets the creature know that it's perfectly safe, it's no threat to the creature, that they're just out on an adventure to explore this area. They want to go and have some fun like they see everyone else doing. And the creature unrolls itself and explains that they're a hedgehog, and that they get quite scared quite easily, so they have to roll up and become prickly and keep themselves safe. And the kitten explains that they're no threat, and asks if the hedgehog wants to come along with them on their adventure. So the hedgehog and the kitten start going on an adventure. The hedgehog's a bit worried about this, worried about what if something goes wrong, what if there's a threat or a risk. But the kitten bravely says that they're there, so it'll all be okay. And hedgehog and the kitten walk through the meadow, push through the grass. Some of the grass is long and spiky and quite solid, and the hedgehog keeps on eating bits and pieces, occasionally just sucking up worms. And other grass is soft and green, and they walk towards the woodland. and walk together into the woodland. And the hedgehog and the kitten have never been this far from their homes, and they continue exploring. And as they walk into the woodland, so they notice the way the temperature drops. Notice a subtle breeze that blows through the trees. And the kitten notices the way the breeze blows on its fur, the way the breeze moves its whiskers. Notices the change in the way the ground feels, from the grass to a more solid muddy ground while walking into the woods. And the kitten and the hedgehog look around themselves. They look up and notice the canopy above them. And they carry on walking deeper into the woods. And while walking deeper into the woods, they just chat and walk, and they get to know each other. And the kitten realizes that having a companion, having someone to talk to, or a friend, sharing experiences, they like that. They're used to being alone. When their owner goes out, they just run around alone. They spend a lot of time alone, and they realise they like having a companion around, like having a friend, like having someone to talk to share things with, to share experiences with. And the kitten and the hedgehog chat. They talk about the sort of things they do every day, different thoughts that they have, different ideas that they have, as they just continue walking deeper into the woods. And they can hear rustling leaves, they can hear the distant sound of a stream. They can hear the sounds of birds singing in the trees. As they walk deeper and deeper into the woods, and the deeper they walk into the woods, the more the kitten starts thinking about that sound of the stream. The kitten recognized the sound, but had never actually visited a stream, and so decided that that's where they would head. That would be their adventure, to find this stream. So the kitten and the hedgehog veer off the path and start cutting through the trees, heading towards that stream. And after walking for a while, feeling calm and relaxed from listening to the sounds around them, and how relaxed everything seemed to be, they found themselves at a bubbling stream. And they watched the way that water bubbled past. And they walked right to the water's edge. And at the water's edge, the kitten could smell that water, and closed its eyes and listened to the sound of that water as it flowed past, almost like trying to become one with the world around them. And the hedgehog walked straight into the water and started swimming, started paddling along in the water and splashing and sploshing in that water, and seemed to really be enjoying themselves. And the kitten put a paw in the water and was uncertain. They didn't know if they really liked this water. And they took the paw out and they put the other paw, front paw, in and took that paw out. And the hedgehog called to the kitten to say, "Come in here. It's okay. You'll have fun." And it wasn't very deep water. Just a bubbling stream, just gently flowing. So the kitten walked gently into the water and thought the feeling of its fur becoming wet was an unusual feeling. Could feel that water as it moved up the legs, as it touched the kitten's belly and then moved up the kitten's side. Could feel almost like the line of water moving up its side as it walked deeper into the water. And then as the kitten carried on walking, suddenly it noticed its feet were hardly touching the bottom of the stream. And it noticed that it bobbed up and down a little and became weightless, and then started flicking its paws back under the water and realized it was swimming. And the kitten held its chin out the water while swimming around tentatively to start with, and then while continuing to swim, the kitten gained in confidence. And the kitten started chasing the hedgehog, and the hedgehog started chasing the kitten. And the kitten started to have fun in this stream, and realizing that this water isn't so bad, isn't scary like they thought it was, that it might feel unusual on the fur when you first get in, but once you're in and having fun, it's a pleasant experience. And the kitten dived down under the water, noticing how the sound changed when it got its head under the water and its ears under the water. Almost like the sound suddenly disappeared and a deeper sound was temporarily there, with just a bubbling sound in the background. And then suddenly the sounds around sprung to life as the kitten's head popped back up from under the water. And the kitten continued splashing and playing, and the hedgehog continued splashing and playing, as they enjoyed swimming around in the stream. And they swam with the water, and they swam against the water, noticing the way that it feels different when you have to swim harder upwards, upstream compared to downstream. And the kitten practiced swimming from one side to the other. And then after a while, the kitten and the hedgehog decided to exit the stream and carry on walking. So they left the stream and they carried on walking, and while they walked on the sunny side of the stream to allow themselves to dry out as they walked. And the kitten thought to themselves what an unusual feeling it was to have your fur drying out, to have it go from heavy to gradually getting lighter and lighter as the water drains out of the fur and evaporates from the fur. And they continued talking with each other while walking along the edge of the stream. And after a while of walking along the edge of the stream, they noticed that the ground began to slope downwards as that stream began to turn into small waterfalls. And they continued following the stream, walking down that sloping ground, and they could see that the stream was leading down to a lake. So they continued following that stream down towards that lake, and they'd never been this far from home, and they found this exciting. They were gazing out down over that lake. They could see some deer drinking at the lake's edge, see the way the woodland circled around the lake. They could see across the tops of the trees down there, in the blue sky and the warm sun, and the green grass and meadow flowers, and that running water. And the kitten and the hedgehog continued their journey down to that lake and decided this was the most beautiful lake, the most beautiful sight they'd ever seen. They'd never seen anything like this. And at the lake they could hear children playing. They could see some children throwing stones into the water. They could see someone out on a boat, just a rowing boat, a little rowing boat, rowing out in the centre of the lake. They could see someone taking photos of the lake. And all these people seemed to be having so much fun. And there seemed to be harmony with nature. With ducks and other birds on the lake. With humans around the lake. With deer down by the lake, all together. And the kitten and the hedgehog decided to find a spot by the water's edge. They'd been on a really long walk, they'd had a swim. They decided it was now time to take a moment to relax, and they relaxed down on the edge of this lake, listening to the way the water lapped onto the shore, with really gentle waves, with a certain stillness to the water. And they relaxed on the shore, and the kitten closed its eyes and felt the warmth of the sun, and just focused on its breathing and relaxing, enjoying this adventure. And while the kitten relaxed, enjoying this adventure, they started drifting into a dream. And as they were drifting into a dream, so they felt like there was a healing light, like the sun had become a healing light, beaming down on them. And they felt like this sun was beaming this light down on them, filling their body with a healing light with each breath they took in, almost like they were breathing out anything bad from within them. And while they drifted asleep, they were listening to the sounds around them, feeling this healing light beating through them. And they started imagining what it must be like to be that person on that boat in the middle of the lake. They started imagining what it must be like to be a human, to be holding the oars, to be moving those oars through the water, hearing that water being pushed forwards and backwards. To feel that boat move through the water with each push. To be able to look around and see the shoreline in all directions. What a human's experience of the warmth of the sun on their face would feel like. And the kitten allowed themselves to be absorbed in this thought. And they started thinking about other things that humans do. They started thinking about those children playing on the other side of the lake, and imagined themselves as the girl on the other side of the lake, playing with a friend, as if they were a princess, imagining themselves in a palace. And the kitten had never been in a palace, but could imagine what a palace must be like. And the kitten imagined being that girl, walking through a palace, the sound of the echoey feet, stepping on the concrete floor, walking through the palace. And while the kitten was imagining being that girl walking through the palace, they could hear a helicopter flying overhead. They could hear sounds in the background, reminding them that they're just a kitten in this very human world. And they wondered whether humans ever wonder what it would be like to escape from this very human world for a while. What it would be like to escape into a dreamlike place, rather than being a play palace on the edge of a lake with a concrete floor and wooden walls. That echoes with the sound of children playing. Whether humans ever wonder what it would be like to really get away from it all. To leave all these very human things behind, all the technology, and be more like the kitten. And the kitten thought that's an unusual thing to think. Whether humans think, I wonder what it would be like to be more like a kitten, to be more back with nature where you don't have anything other than the experience. And they imagined that a human might relax by the lake, perhaps with just a tent to keep themselves warm and dry and safe from the elements. And while they're warm and dry and safe from the elements, they'd be able to just listen to nature, listen to the water lapping on the shore. Not paying attention to a device. Just keeping things basic, having food and shelter and warmth. And the kitten wondered whether humans ever wonder that. And after a while, the kitten began to wake up and noticed that the humans had all gone, that the sun was beginning to set. They gazed up at the sky as the sun was beginning to set, and they noticed the myriad of stars appearing in the sky, and a streak of dusty stars spread across the middle of the sky. And they gazed up in awe at a sight they'd never seen before. They'd never heard of light pollution, but they knew that back at home they didn't see the stars like this, like they can at this lake. And the kitten and the hedgehog gazed up at those stars and watched them as they started to cross the sky, as the sun continued to set, and the inky blue sky began to turn a darker blue and a black, with twinkling lights up there. And the kitten noticed how those lights in the sky were reflected in that lake. And the kitten and the hedgehog began to make their journey back around the lake, began to make their journey back up that hill. And then they started following that stream back to where they first found it. And as they followed the stream, they talked about the day they'd had, the adventure they'd been on. Talked about how they liked being able to share the experience. Talked about things that had worried them, dreams they'd had. As they continued walking, following that stream, occasionally looking up at the stars, noticing shooting stars, before turning into the woods and being aware that the sound is different at night. There are different animals out at night and different sounds. That although it's quiet during the daytime, the quiet takes on a whole new quality at night time. They walked through the woods, back out to that meadow, walked through the meadow, and back towards the fence at the back garden. And the hedgehog and the kitten said goodbye to each other and agreed they would see each other again. And then the kitten jumped at the wooden fence, dug its claws in and scrabbled up the fence to the top, and jumped down from the top of the fence into the back garden, and walked through the back garden, through the cat flap, into their home, ate some food and then went back in front of that fire, settled down in front of the fire, and fell asleep. And then the kitten in front of the fire awoke from that dream, thought it was an unusual dream to have. They noticed that it was now getting late, that it was time to settle down for bed properly. So they went up to their bedroom, they went over to a small little bed by the main bed. They settled down in that bed, closed their eyes and began to drift off asleep. And as they were drifting off asleep, thinking about the dream they'd just had, while they were down in front of the fire, they wondered what dream they would have next. They wondered what they'll learn from their dreams. And as they wondered this, so they just began to drift deeper and more comfortably asleep for the night. So take a moment to allow your eyes to close Allow yourself to begin to relax. And as you begin to relax, I don't know whether you'll relax deeper with the sound of my voice, or whether it'll be with the spaces between my words. But as you begin to relax, listening to my voice, I'm just going to tell you a story in the background. And while I tell this story, you can just drift comfortably asleep. And the story is about a business person. And they're on a flight, as they do frequently. And while they're on this flight, as the plane takes off and rises into the sky, they settle into the flight by putting on an eye mask, putting in some headphones, shutting out all external noises, all external sight. And they just have a relaxing sound playing in their ears as they begin to drift comfortably in your mind. And as they begin to drift comfortably, they start to have this feeling of walking through a forest. And as they have this feeling of walking through a forest, they start to hear the sound of each footstep. And they start to feel the feeling of each footstep. The sound and the feelings of the footsteps on the leaves on the ground, on the muddy path. And they pay attention to that mud. They pay attention to what it looks like, what it sounds like, its consistency. And as they pay attention to that mud, so they drift deeper into their mind. And while they drift deeper into their mind, this forest begins to become more real to them. The forest begins to form. First other sounds of the wind blowing through the trees, of the rustling leaves, the sounds of birds, the sounds of other animals, different sounds of scurrying, of movement, of cracking twigs in the distance. And although there are these sounds, they have this feeling like this is peaceful. They think of it as being peaceful, even though there are some sounds around them. And after they have a sense of the sounds, they begin to get a sense of what they can see. They start to notice from the ground out to the sides where there's more greenery. They notice the way that around the base of trees there's just more mud, some toadstools, but generally quite clear areas. And then a bit away from the trees, they notice that there's smaller plants growing in the areas where the canopy above doesn't quite block the light to the forest floor. They notice the different shades of browns, the different colours of the bark of the trees. They can feel the slight breeze on their face. And they notice the different greens. And they imagine how those greens change as the seasons change. How the greens change to autumnal colours. and they gaze around themselves, taking in this forest. As they become more distant from that plane, and while they become more aware of the forest, so they relax deeper, and this reality becomes more real to them. And they continue walking this forest path. And in the distance they can hear a babbling stream. And they start walking towards that sound. And as they walk towards the sound of the babbling stream, so they drift deeper and more relaxed. And as they drift deeper and more relaxed, so the babbling stream increases in sound. And as they near the stream, they start to smell the fresh air. That kind of fresh air that you get given off by water. And they reach the stream and they gaze down into the stream. And it's a very shallow stream, and they can see the movement on the surface and how it follows the rocks below. They can see twigs floating down the stream. And they start following that stream, following the stream towards a lake. And they walk along the edge of that stream, and they see a little family of ducks in the stream. And they slow down to admire the ducks, to watch the ducks going about their everyday business. And the ducks turn and start heading upstream. And they watch how the ducks tack across the stream so that they can start working their way up the stream. And how the parents keep an eye on the youngsters. And then they continue following that stream. And after a while they find the lake, out in a clearing. And around the lake, as they look around, they notice the blue sky above. They notice any clouds. They notice the time of day. They notice the forest circling around that lake. And they go and sit down on the side next to the lake, listening to the water of the lake lapping gently on the shore, gazing out and relaxing, feeling the warmth of the sun, smelling the fresh air as it blows gently off the top of the lake, hearing the rustling leaves of the forest in the background, and the sounds of birds, and seeing some deer across the other side of the lake, drinking some water, and looking around and seeing what else you notice. And they decide to rest here for a while. And while they rest here for a while, they feel themselves drifting and dreaming into a reverie as they relax. And while they relax, they start to hear the voice of a child. and they wonder at first whether the voice of the child is in their mind or somewhere nearby. And they look around and they see in the distance a child playing by the lake. And as the sun's beginning to set, they stand up and they walk around the lake. They walk over to that child and they ask the child what they're doing. And the child says they're just playing by the lake. They ask where their parents are, and the child says they don't have any parents. They live here. And as the sun's setting, the person decides to set up a little camp and asks the child if they want to join them. And the person sets up a little campfire, a tent, and cooks up some food for each other. And sit and eat the food, and the person asks about what the child is doing here, how the child survives. And the child explains there's plenty here to survive on. And they occupy themselves. They play by day and sleep by night. And they don't see company. They don't see other people. This person is the first person they've seen in a long time. And the child explains that they appeared here one day. They were sat somewhere in a library, reading a book. And while they were reading, they started imagining things and drifting off in their imagination. And the next minute they found themselves here. And they didn't know where here was. And they've never seen their parents since. And they said that in the book they were reading, it said about a dragon. A wise dragon that lives in a palace on a faraway planet. And that dragon can show them the way home. But he didn't know how to find that dragon, so he remained here. He felt safe and comfortable here at this lake. Able to relax by day and play and sleep at night. And there was plenty around to eat. And he learned a lot of skills. And the person thought they're going to help this child. See if they can help this child get home. Because they know that they can get home just by thinking about waking up. They don't know why the child can't just think about waking up and get home, or why they seem to have this shared experience. And then as the sun finally sets fully over the horizon, and the moon rises in the sky, the two of them fall asleep. And as they fall asleep, so the campfire burns down to embers, emitting a gentle warmth, and the sounds around them change from the day sounds to the night sounds as they relax deeper and drift comfortably asleep. And the next day the person tells the child that they're going to go and try and find this dragon. They didn't know if there was any kind of a clue, and they were told that the only clue is that you've got to search in daylight and find the waterfall. And they didn't know what this meant, but they thought it's a start. So they left the child, walked around the lake, and continued following the stream back into the woods out the other side of the lake. And as they followed the stream, so the sounds dimmed as they walked deeper into the forest again. And while they walked deeper into the forest, they became aware of the change of sounds again, aware of the way that light danced and shimmered in front of them, as it shone down through the canopy above. The way it created rays of light, as it lit up pollen and dust in the air. And everything felt so peaceful and calm. And they were curious how they were going to help this child. But they thought if they're looking for a waterfall, following the stream is probably the best place to start. And so they followed this stream deeper into the forest, so deep into the forest that they couldn't see where they came from, and the stream wound left and right. And they continued following that stream. Occasionally they'd hear splashes of birds dive bombing into the stream, catching small fish. They would catch glimpses of other animals drinking from the stream, and glimpses of animals through the trees. But the animals kept their distance. They could hear the sounds of birds and hear other forest sounds. And they occasionally ran their fingers along the bark of the trees and listened to the sounds of their footsteps, and a feeling of walking alone through this forest, curious how they'll help the child. And they walked deeper and deeper, and they could sense that the day was moving on, that it had probably passed the middle of the day and the sun would be setting soon. They continued to walk until they eventually found another clearing. And at this clearing, they gazed out and saw that they were now on a bit of a slope. And that the stream had begun to widen. And because it's on more of a slope, the stream was now travelling faster. And was louder than before. and there was more white water as the stream worked its way over and around rocks. So they followed this widening stream across the clearing. They could see what time of day it was, and that the sun was beginning to set. So they decided to stop at the far side of the clearing and camp there for the night, and they'd carry on their journey in the morning. So they cooked themselves some food. They lay back in a makeshift tent, gazing up at the sky, watching the way stars twinkled, watching shooting stars pass across the sky, having this feeling like they could hear them crackling as they flew past, and even having a feeling like they could smell them, a slightly sulphur smell. And as they gazed up at the sky, so they drift comfortably asleep. And the next morning, they packed up and carried on their journey into the woods. And they continued walking deeper and deeper. They were aware that the ground was sloping down even more now. The water was speeding up faster. And after a few hours of walking, they could hear this roar gradually appearing in the distance. And the roar got louder and louder as they walked closer and closer, until eventually they came out of the other side of the forest and found themselves atop a cliff, looking down a long drop. And as they looked down that long drop, they could see the stream they've been following pouring down as a waterfall, and they could see other streams from other places in the forest in a large arc, all falling down in their own waterfalls. And they climbed down the side of the waterfall. They could feel the spray of the water on their face. They could hear that waterfall pouring down to a giant lake below. They walked all the way down, climbed all the way down, and reached the base. Walked part way round the lake so they could step back and have a look at the different waterfalls. They wondered whether these were the waterfalls they were supposed to find. So they looked at the different waterfalls. And they could see that the sun was shining into this area, and that the shadow as the sun moved across the sky was moving across the land. And they just sat and watched, wondering what it is they're supposed to learn. Just sat there with patience, being sure that when they saw it or learned it, it would just stand out to them. And they watched as the sun moved around and the light passed across the different waterfalls. And then at one of the waterfalls, as the light reached it, It created this beautiful rainbow in the spray. And from their perspective, they noticed the rainbow was a circle. And that it seemed to shimmer in the middle. And they had this feeling that somehow this was the sign. And they jumped in the water and they swam across the lake towards that waterfall. Coming out of the water, near to the waterfall. And they could still see that rainbow. And they climbed up to where the rainbow was. And they noticed that there was a cave behind that waterfall. And they walked into the cave, noticing how the sounds changed to this watery, echoey sound as the sound of the waterfall reverberated around the cave walls. And they started walking deeper into the cave, and as they walked deeper into the cave, they noticed how the light from the sun was somehow reflecting around the cave off of crystals within this cave, lighting up the interior of the cave. And they were sure this would only last a while, just while the sun is in the right position. So they walked deeper into the cave. They could hear dripping water as the rumble of water behind them faded the deeper they walked. And after a while of walking, they heard a slight hum. And they continued walking, and the more they walked, the louder the hum got. And after a while, they could see the back cave wall was shimmering slightly. It looked like solid rock, but it also looked like it was shimmering, like it was slightly out of focus. And they rubbed their eyes, and they tried to focus their eyes, but nothing they did seemed to bring that cave wall into focus. It just continued to shimmer slightly. So they walked closer to it, and then reached out with their hand to touch the wall, and found their hand went straight through the wall. And as the hand went through the wall, so the humming got slightly louder. They could feel their heart racing slightly more, so they started breathing in a calm way. Breathing in, counting to 7, and breathing out, counting to 11, to help themselves to trigger the relaxation response. And the more they relaxed, the calmer they became, until the breathing was just happening automatically in that calm way. And they then walked forward, keeping their arm outstretched, and they saw their arm disappearing through the cave wall. And then they stepped forward and watched as their foot and their leg went through the cave wall. And the humming got louder the more of them was through the wall. And then they followed their arm and their leg, passing themselves fully through that cave wall. And they found themselves in what looked like a cave, facing out towards the exit of the cave. And it looked like it was night time. And so they continued walking forward. They exited the cave. They looked up at the night sky, and they could see the most beautiful nebula stretched across the sky, the most beautiful colours. bright stars, 2 moons, and none of it looked like they were used to, and they were very quickly aware this wasn't the Earth. This wasn't where they came from. And so, because it was night time, they decided to just stay still, just stay put for a while. So they set up a camp, and they just watched and waited, watching how the moons moved across the sky, watching the way the stars moved across the sky, until eventually they watched as the sun began to rise. And as the sun began to rise, so they noticed off in the distance a glint of light, that the sun was shining on something highly reflective. And they wondered whether that was where they had to head next. And as the sun rose, it revealed more of this land. And the land looked familiar yet different. There was greenery, there was sounds like animals. There was different colours of plants, but none of it was what they'd seen before. And everything was slender and taller. And as they started walking, they found that they just felt that little bit lighter, a little more bounce in their step. And they realised this planet must be smaller, or at least have less mass. And just moving around felt easier. And they started walking in the direction of that glint of light. And as they walked across open meadow, admiring the different plants and animals they could see, different insects, and recognizing how they have a familiar feel to them, yet none of them looked like they'd seen before. And then they passed into a forest and walked deeper into that forest, trying to keep in direction with where they were heading. And after quite some time of walking, they found themselves come out the other side of the forest and back to a clearing. And they could see that there were hills leading up to some mountains. As they climbed the hills and walked over the hills, and they could see that up in the mountains was what looked like a crystal palace. It was all spiky and very tall. So they continued in the direction of that palace. They assumed that palace must be what they're searching for. And they climbed the hills and went over the hills, and they started to climb the mountain. And they found climbing the mountain much easier than they imagined it would be. And as they climbed higher and higher, so they were aware of the temperature changing and getting a bit colder. And it wasn't uncomfortably cold. but they were aware that it was a bit colder as they climbed into the mountains. And after some trek, they finally reached that palace. And they just had to cross what looked like a crystal bridge to the entrance to the palace. So they crossed that bridge. They knocked on the entrance to the palace, and they could hear their knock reverberate around the inside of the palace, as if somehow their small little sound of a knock was amplified by the door and by the structure. And after a few moments, the door creaked and swung open, and they walked in to that palace. And the palace appeared to be empty, and they walked around the palace, looking around, looking how high the ceiling was, how large these rooms were, how empty everything seemed. And in the distance they could hear the sound of deep breathing. And that breathing sounded really powerful. And they walked through from one room to another, before eventually entering a room with a huge dragon just resting there. And as they entered, the dragon rose its head. And then, on seeing the person, rose to its feet and towered over him. And as the dragon towered over them, it let out a burst of fire up into the air, followed by another and another, as if to clear its throat, before looking down at the person and asking why they've come in a deep, booming voice, who they are, where they're from. And the person felt perfectly fine and safe, felt there was something trusting about this dragon. And the person explained about meeting this child, and how this child had been reading a book in a library, and then found themselves next to a lake, and how they'd met this child next to that lake, but they're sure they can just wake up if they choose. But this child doesn't seem to be able to, and that the child had read something about needing to find a dragon in a palace on a planet. And so here they are. And the dragon told them they had to go through to a room out the back, to the library of the palace, and that they would find a book on a shelf, and they would know when they see it. It would be in the most beautiful golden cover that just seems to shine and reflect, as if it's just as new as it's been created today, yet it's thousands of years old. And that they're to take that book and that in that book the child is to read one of the chapters, and reading that chapter will end the story for them. And as their story ends, so they will wake up back in the library, as if no time has passed. So the person thanks the dragon, walks all the way to the library, and sees this vast library with tens of thousands of books. And they look around all the walls, until they see a book that seems to jump out at them, something that just seems to shine and sparkle. And they go over to it, take this huge book off the shelf, and carry it out of the library, back to the room with the dragon. They ask that dragon about the library, about who they are and what they're doing here. The dragon explains that they're the guardian of the 9 realms, and that to be the guardian of the 9 realms, they need to have all the knowledge of the 9 realms, and that one library is one of the libraries containing all the knowledge. And that what the child and what they were in is one of those 9 realms. And the person asked about the book. How does the book work? How's the book going to get back here if we take it from this library? And the dragon said the books always find their way home when they're no longer needed. They're always stored in the right place for when they are needed. The dragon explained that all the libraries are like a brain. They contain all this knowledge, and they continually get larger and larger, with more books and more knowledge. And no knowledge is ever lost from the library. Not all knowledge gets looked at all the time, but no knowledge is ever lost. Any knowledge that gets taken from the library always finds its way back to where it came from. And the person didn't really understand, but thanked the dragon for their help. And the dragon dropped back to the ground with a massive thud, took a deep breath, rested its head and closed its eyes as if it was falling asleep again. And the person asked, "Why do you just sleep? Do you not do anything else?" And the dragon said in a sleepy voice, "They're not sleeping. They have to drift into a state that allows them to open up their consciousness to monitor the 9 realms. And they connect their consciousness through all the realms, and they can see all, hear all, sense all, feel all, and know everything about those 9 realms. And they close their eyes and seem to drift away from here. As the person took the book, turned and left the palace, and they found their way back down the mountain, and they noticed that now the sun for this planet was setting, and they went down the mountain, went to the meadows, crossed the meadow and found their way back to that cave. And they decided they would camp here for the night before going through the cave. They thought it'd be interesting to camp on an alien planet. And they'd now been awake for a while, so they were ready to fall asleep comfortably. And so they watched as the sun set, as the two moons rose, as the nebula and all the stars appeared brightly in the sky. And they watched and admired the uniqueness, the novelty of the experience of seeing a world never seen before, wondering whether they would ever visit here again, wondering whether the real Earth that they're asleep in is one of the 9 realms, or if all of this is just one big dream. Or whether this place is separate from all those 9 realms, and maybe there's other caves like this one that lead to the different realms. They had so many thoughts, so much curiosity that filled their mind as they drifted comfortably asleep. And then after sleeping for a number of hours, they awoke feeling refreshed, revitalized, full of energy. Packed away, picked up the book, walked through the cave, walked through the wall at the back of the cave, walked through the cave in the back of the waterfall, and found their way out of the waterfall, back down to the lake. They didn't want to get the book wet, so this time they carefully worked their way around the edge. They had to pass under a few waterfalls as they did so. So they just covered the book and wrapped it up while they passed under the waterfalls. But they were sure the book would have got more wet if they tried swimming with it. And then they found their way back to the waterfall that they'd initially climbed down the side of. And they climbed up that waterfall and found their way back through the forest, back to the first clearing. And they crossed that clearing, and then through the second bit of forest, following the stream the whole time, until eventually they found their way back to the lake. And back at the lake they could see in the distance the child was playing and going into the water and splashing around. And they went back to that child. And they explained to the child the journey they'd just been on. And the child said about how they'd been gone for what felt like weeks. And yet to the person it felt like they'd only been gone perhaps a day, maybe 2 at the most. And they explained to the child about the book, and about how once the child reads the chapter in the book, that's the end chapter of the book, and then closes the book, so they'll find themselves back in the library. as if no time has elapsed at all. And so the child read that last chapter all the way through to where it said the end. They looked up at the person and smiled. The person wondered what that chapter said. The child closed the book and then seemed to dematerialize in front of them. And the child appeared back in the library, noticing how their hands were closing the book, that they'd started reading in this library what felt like so long ago. And all that experience suddenly felt like a bit of a dream, as they were now faced with being in a library, as if that entire period of time hadn't happened. And they stood up and went off to find their parents. And the person watched that child dematerialize, hoping the child will be fine, and noticing how just after the child dematerialized, so the book began to dematerialize too. And they hadn't had an opportunity to open the book themselves. They hadn't thought to do it sooner. And they hadn't had an opportunity to see what that chapter said. And they watched the book dematerialize. And they then just sat in their makeshift tent by a campfire, thinking about how everything's back to normal. Their experience is back to how it normally is, that they drift off in a reverie when they make journeys. And they come to this place, they gaze out over this lake, they enjoy some time camping, enjoying being in nature. And they just drifted comfortably and relaxed, asleep. So take a moment to let your eyes close and allow yourself to begin to comfortably drift asleep. And as you begin to comfortably drift off asleep, I don't know whether you'll drift asleep faster with the sound of my voice or with the words that I'm using, or whether you'll find yourself drifting faster with the spaces between my words. And as you begin to drift comfortably asleep, you can listen to me tell this story in the background. And one day, a man is out on an adventure. He's gone on a safari, and he's out in Africa on a big 4x4. And he's got his camera and he's scanning the horizon. He's looking for lions. He's zooming in on the zebra. He's seeing what he can see with his camera. And then the 4x4 drives on a little bit and will stop somewhere else on this savannah. And he looks around, he takes a few more photos. And then it moves somewhere else, and they get a different perspective, seeing different animals. And he can notice the colour of the sky and how that contrasts with the colour of the ground in the savannah. How much browns there are in this savannah, while there's also pockets of greens and other colours. And there's the occasional pool of water, making a striking blue area. within the savannah. And when he looks through his camera, looks through the eyepiece, and he zooms in on something, he can't hear it, but he can see it moving and walking and feeding. And while he's watching the animals, he feels like he's somewhere else, some time else, where there's no sounds of what he's seeing. It just feels like he's there with them. In the same way that when you look through a telescope at night time and you look up at Saturn and you're in the pitch black and all you can see is what you can see through the eyepiece, and you can see Saturn moving slowly across the view that you're looking at. And you almost feel like you're floating in space, just a little distance from Saturn. And the first time someone does that can be a really profound experience. And then as the sun begins to set on the savannah, so the light begins to change. Shadows begin to stretch across the ground. Contrast increases, and a certain orange hue takes on the environment. And he takes plenty of photos. At this time, when the sun is setting, when the animals are beginning to settle down for the night, when the light is just perfect for photography. And after the sun has set, and there's no lights anywhere, he gazes up and sees the most beautiful, magnificent night sky, arcing overhead, sees the way the Milky Way stretches across the sky. He takes some photos of the sky before they all get back into this 4x4 and head back to the camp. And back at the camp, he goes to his room, goes out on the balcony out the back of the room, and he can hear the nighttime sounds of the savannah. He can feel the gentle breeze on his face. While he sits there at a table with his camera, reviewing the photos he'd spent the day taking. And as he sat there reviewing the photos, so his mind began to wander. And while his mind began to wander, he began to wonder. He wondered what it would be like to be living here, nomadically, to be living out on that savannah, where every night you're greeted with that glorious space view. Every day you feel the warmth of the day. You see animals going about their daily life. And he wondered and wondered about what that must be like. And he just sat in that chair, relaxing, letting his mind drift and wander as his fingers clicked through the photos while he was just gazing into space. And after going through the photos and doing some wondering, he went to bed, settled down looking forward to the next day, and drifted comfortably asleep. And while he drifted comfortably asleep, he started to dream about himself living out on a savannah, and he had a pet wolf that was a companion that came on his journeys with him, kept him company. He started to dream about the adventures that him and his pet wolf would have. Of going hunting to catch food, of sitting by a river for hours and hours relaxing and fishing just to catch a fish for dinner. Of building his own camps and shelter. And he became absorbed in the dream. And while he became absorbed in the dream, he started to have a sense that in this dream, this time period, was going back just a couple of 100 years. And he could see cutting across the savannah was a railway track with an old steam train traversing the savannah with ornate wooden carriages, people dressed smart old clothes. And he watched as the train passed by, and he saw in the distance a train station, and he decided that he would go and check out this train station. So him and the wolf made the journey along the edge of the train track, following that train track towards the train station. And as they walked, he could hear the sounds of his footsteps. He could feel the slight breeze on his face and the warmth of the sun, and hear the panting of the wolf. And he followed that track towards the train station. And as he got closer to the train station, so he noticed how basic the station was. And there was no one there, just a train station in the middle of nowhere. There was no sign saying the name of the station. There was no roads leading to or from the station. Just a station in the middle of nowhere. And he walked up onto the wooden boards of the station, noticing how his Footsteps sounded different as he walked from solid mud up wooden steps onto a wooden platform. And he walked into the shade on the wooden platform and sat down on a bench, and the wolf came and sat beside him. And the two of them just sat and waited. And while they sat there waiting, he reached over and started petting the wolf, scratching just behind the wolf's ear, stroking the side of its neck. And the wolf gently rested its head against the man's leg. And as the sun travelled across the sky, the man just waited. He didn't know where the trains came from, where the trains went, but he was curious to find out. So he just waited and waited. And after some time, he could see in the distance some steam on the horizon, and a little bit longer he could see a train appear on the horizon. And he watched as that train got nearer and nearer to the station. He stood up, he walked over towards the track and waited near the track as the train noisily pulled in, let off some steam, and came to a halt. And he climbed up some steps and into a carriage. And he noticed there were other people talking among themselves on the train. And he sat down in a window seat. And the wolf lay down on the floor by his feet under the table. And the train jolted to a start, slowly at first, and then picking up speed as it left the station. And the man was curious where the train's going to go. And as the train left the station, it picked up speed, getting faster and faster, noticing the increasing speed of the clickety-clack of the track, watching the outside world go by. And then suddenly there was a blue flash, a bright light, and then darkness, all outside the train. And yet the train felt no different. It seemed to still be going at the same speed. It was making the same sounds. There was no jolt. There was nothing on the train that would lead anyone to think that anything had happened. And yet outside the window now were lights, almost like points of lights or stars. There was no longer any savannah. In any direction, whatever window he looked out of, there was just lights. And then the train seemed to be speeding up, and the lights nearer to the train began to look more like streaks. And the man was confused, and yet the wolf lay on the floor, perfectly calm and perfectly comfortable with the experience. So the man trusted that the experience was fine, was safe, which led to an intense curiosity to discover what's occurring, where this is. And then the train began to lean slightly, as if it was turning. And as it did, the man noticed out of the window on the opposite side that there appeared to be a planet, like although the train was making sounds like it was on a track, it now seemed like it was in space. And the train began to circle that planet. And the man didn't know what to make of this, how you're supposed to leave the train, what's supposed to be occurring. And he gazed down at that planet below, and none of the other passengers on the train seemed remotely fazed by this. And then a guard walked down the centre of the train, asking anyone who's getting off at this stop to follow him. And the man didn't know what that meant. How can you get off when you're in space? But he thought he's here on an adventure. He's curious, so you may as well try and find out what's going on. So he followed the guard down the train. And the guard ushered the man, his wolf, and a few others into what just looked like a carriage at the back of the train. And he walked into that carriage, sat down against the wall, put on a seatbelt. The door was closed. There was a psst sound as air or a separation happened between the carriage and the rest of the train. And then there was silence. And the man had this vague sense of movement, vague sense that the carriage was moving. And he could see out the back of the carriage a small little square window, and he could see through that window, and he noticed the carriage began to face towards the planet and just seemed to float easily, calmly and effortlessly towards that planet. And then as it got nearer to the planet, the carriage began to shake and vibrate slightly. He could see red light at that window. And then after a few minutes, the red light cleared, the vibration stopped, and he could see the ground beneath him. And then after a few more minutes, he heard a thud as the carriage rumbled slightly, and he could see through that window that it had landed on the ground. And he took the seatbelt off just as someone was opening the door to the carriage. And he walked out of the door. The wolf followed him, and he was dazzled by the bright light of the day. He looked up into the sky to try and see the rest of the train. He tried to work out where he was. Nothing looked familiar. It all had a vague sense of familiarity, in that plants were green, mud was brown, the sky was blue, but none of the plants were familiar plants. None of the view was a familiar view. And strangely, as he turned and looked back at the carriage he'd just exited, it was on a railway track. Somehow this railway carriage had entered space, had detached from a train, had dropped into the atmosphere of a planet and landed directly on a train track. And he thought to himself how impressive that is, to be able to land an object like that on two rails on the ground from space. He didn't know what he was supposed to do, what he was allowed to do, but he decided to go exploring. So him and the wolf, they went off, had a bit of a wander. And they could see off in the distance was a river. So they walked over to that river. And they looked around and they could see the way the sun for this planet looked in the sky, that it seemed to have a slightly oranger tint to it. And that was making the blue of the river water have a slight orange glow to its surface. And they reached the river, and the man put his hand down. He wanted to feel the water. He put his hand down, he rested his fingertips into the water, and he could feel that cool flowing water passing through his fingertips. He could hear the bubbling of the water as it flowed downstream. He could see animals he'd never seen before, drinking from the river. And strange fish he'd never seen before, swimming in the river. And he followed the river all the way down to a lake. And as he got down by the lake, it was starting to get late. So he decided he needed to build himself a shelter for the night. And he was curious whether he could build himself a shelter on the lake. So he went collecting some wood from the woodland, He collected long bits of grass. He peeled off strips of bark from some of the wood. He wrapped it all together and put it all together and created a raft. Then he created a tent shape out of wood, and he placed that on top of the raft. And then he bound the two together. And then he went and found some large, broad leaves. He placed them over the top of the tent, and using the strips of bark, he weaved them all together. He found some moss and leaves and other soft material that he placed inside his tent on the raft. And he had a small area of the raft that the tent didn't cover. And he got some stones and he placed them around in a circle, gradually moving to the centre of that circle. And then he made himself a little fire. He knew that there was a risk that it could possibly burn through to the bottom, burn through to the wood underneath it. But he'd left an air gap, and he was confident that the way he'd made the fire, that it wouldn't get through to the raft itself, and if it did, he could just knock it into the water, and it would be fine. He then moved the raft out onto the water to see if it would float. Pushed it out onto the water. The wolf helped by pulling on the raft. They got it out into the water and it floated. And he climbed into it. The wolf climbed in next to him. The raft tent bobbed up and down a little bit. He used some vines that he'd found around the trees to attach the raft to a stake that he left on the shore, so that it could move out from the shore a little way but was still attached to that point on the shore. He lit the fire and cooked up some fish. And relaxed down for the night in that raft. And as he relaxed, he closed his eyes. He could feel the gentle bobbing motion of the raft boat, of the raft tent on that water. He could hear different night sounds of different animals at night. He could see what the night sky looked like here, and how it was different to the night sky on Earth. And he began to drift off asleep, with the warmth of the wolf lying next to him. And while he drifted off asleep, he began to feel this deep sense of serenity, of peace, of calmness, a deep connection with the environment, with the world around him, like he was one with the world. And as he relaxed deeper into the experience, all he could see in his mind's eye was blackness. And then he began to hear footsteps, like footsteps echoing in a stone chamber. And gradually, a stone palace began to appear around him as the darkness began to disappear. And as the darkness began to disappear and this stone palace appeared around him, he realized the footsteps were his own and that he was walking through this palace. And he looked up, he looked around to see how grand it was, the colour of the stone on the walls, on the floor, the echoey sound of each footstep. He touched some of the stone pillars to notice how polished they were and smooth. And he walked towards someone sat in a seat. And as he got near them, they rose and walked down some steps towards him. And they started telling him about some secret knowledge and a secret library underneath this palace. And they walked around and down some steps, and he followed them. And he walked with them down the spiral stairs underneath the palace, where he saw mile upon mile of books in an underground library. He was told that all the knowledge of the universe is contained somewhere within all these books. And the knowledge you seek, you shall find here. And he didn't know he was seeking knowledge, yet he did know. His curiosity has driven him to continue exploring into the unknown. And he walked down the different aisles of books. He could smell those books. Until he found a book that seemed to resonate with him. He didn't know what it was about the cover that made the book resonate, but it somehow resonated. He picked the book off the shelf, was surprised to find he could understand the writing, despite its ancient look and despite the fact that it's on an alien planet. He found himself effortlessly reading through that book and effortlessly absorbing that knowledge and wisdom from the book. It talked to him about pretending, and that pretending is the key to everything. And he didn't fully understand this, but it talked about pretending is the key to success. And after reading the book, he walked around and read another book and another book, until eventually he decided it was time to make the journey home. And he journeyed back out of the library, up the spiral staircase, back into that palace room where his footsteps echoed as he saw that person sat on the chair. He then walked away, across the stone, echoing his way out of the palace. And strangely, the palace seemed to lead into darkness, and he kept walking as the palace began to fade and darkness set in, until all he could do was hear his footsteps. And then after a while, his footsteps faded, and he woke up in that tent, floating on the lake, relaxing, with the wolf sleeping beside him. And he saw the sun on this planet rising, heard the change in animal sounds as a new day set in. He pulled himself back to the shore, and the two of them walked back, following the river, and then heading back in the direction of that train carriage. And as they approached the train carriage, he was surprised to see that the carriage was now just one of many carriages on a train on the track. And he went to the platform and he climbed on the train. And he sat down on the train and then heard a whistle sound as that train jolted to a start. Started along the track, picking up speed, getting faster and faster, chugging along, the clickety-clack getting faster and faster, the scenery flashing by, faster and faster. Then there was a dazzling light, and then blackness and stars. And yet the clickety-clack sound continued. Everything on the train continued as if nothing had changed. And yet his experience told him he must now be back in space, leaving that planet. And he watched out the windows as all the stars flashed by, turning to streaks, getting faster and faster. Before getting that feeling of the train turning again, and then looking out the window and seeing the earth below. And then, like before, a guard walked down the centre of the train, saying anyone who's getting off here, follow him. And he followed the guard to the back of the train, into the carriage at the back of the train. He strapped himself in. He heard the carriage detach from the train. He could see through the small window in the back that the carriage was heading down towards the earth. It rumbled through the atmosphere. before landing on Earth, and the door opening, and he exited the train. And he saw that it was back on the track, almost at the point where he'd got on it. And the man and the wolf left the carriage, looked around and took in the familiarity, the feeling of walking back on Earth again, and started making their way back across the savannah. And after a little while of them making their way back across the savannah, the man on his safari began to drift deeper and deeper asleep beyond the dream. He began to drift into a deep, recuperative sleep, where his mind and body would heal itself, make all the necessary changes from the day for the future, integrating all learning, all inner wisdom, all the insights gained from the day and from the experiences, and learning from the dream. And the man drifted deeper and more comfortably asleep. Aware that at some point in the morning he was going to go on another safari adventure, and would probably lead to more dreams, more strange tales at night, to help him relax, sleep, and reprogram his mind to be the person he's becoming. And with a smile, he drifted to a sleep, into a deep and comfortable, relaxing sleep. So take a moment to close your eyes and begin to allow yourself to relax. And I don't know whether you'll find yourself relaxing deeper to the sound of my voice or the spaces between my words, or whether you'll just drift deeper and more comfortably asleep as you continue listening to this story. So while you listen along to this story, you can begin to have a sense of what it would be like to be sitting in a car outside on a rainy night. And you can hear the faint sound of traffic in the background. And you've not got the windscreen wipers on, you've not got the radio on. You're just in the car on your own, with the sound of the rain on the windscreen, on the car. And as you watch the water flowing down the windscreen, and you perhaps follow some of the raindrops, you can begin to notice how that kind of takes you a bit deeper into the experience, following those raindrops. And as you look through the windscreen, you can see the distorted image of the world around you. You can see street lights. Notice the way that the water streaks those street lights out and distorts the light. And noticing the rain hitting the ground and puddles. and yet feeling warm and relaxed in the car. Just sitting in silence in the car, listening to that rain. Perhaps noticing that car smell. And as you sit in that car and you notice that car smell, your mind can begin to wander. And as your mind begins to wander, so you can start to get an idea. You can start to get an idea of somebody sat in a cave thousands of years ago. And they're looking out from the cave, and they've got a fire just inside the cave that's crackling away, and the light from the fire is dancing on the cave walls. And they're looking out over a savanna, gazing out over a savanna, and it's raining currently, and they're keeping dry and warm in the cave while gazing out over that savanna, noticing sheets of rain. And they're cooking a meal with the fire while keeping warm, and enjoying that meal while they relax to the sound of the rain in the background. And as they relax, they've not got a care in the world. They know they don't want to leave the cave at the moment because of the rain. But they've got some food, they've got some warmth, and the sound of the rain to help relax them. And as they continue listening to the sound of that rain, so they continue to eat. And they can smell their food. They can feel the fur that they're sat on. And after eating, they lie down on that fur, relax back, close their eyes and just listen to that rain outside the cave and the sound of that crackling fire just inside the cave. And they feel themselves taking long and deep breaths as they relax and drift and dream. And while they relax and drift and dream to the sound of the rain, so they begin to start thinking about their spirit animal. And their spirit animal is a small little mammal. And they have a sense of this spirit animal going on a journey of inner discovery. And they know that spirit animals teach and educate. They share some kind of enlightened wisdom through metaphor for the person to understand. And so the person knows this. And so they have a sense of being that spirit animal, scurrying around on a warm summer's day, And as they have a sense of scurrying around on a warm summer's day, so the sounds of the crackling fire and the rain disappear into the background, while they become more absorbed in being this spirit animal and what this animal will teach them. And the animal scurries around, goes into tunnels, comes out of tunnels, scurries through grass, feels the warmth of the sun on its fur, hears the sounds around it. And after a while, it pushes through some leaves, finding itself on a secret path. And this little spirit animal follows the path, notices the way the sunlight dances on the path, notices what each footstep feels like, looks around itself, can smell flowers, see dry mud whirl up a little bit in dust storms, before settling off in the distance. And the animal just carries on following this secret path. Through trees, sometimes into clearings, seeing out into the distance. Sometimes around the edge of hills and mountains. And yet it knows it's on a journey, it's on an adventure somewhere, searching for meaning. And after some time searching, following the path, the animal veers into a hole, follows that hole to see where it goes. And follows that hole deeper and deeper. Before eventually appearing in the most lush land it had ever explored. And it continued to explore this lush land, to push through cool grass, flowers, to scurry around this lush land. And in the distance, this little spirit animal could hear a trickling stream. And the spirit animal scurried in the direction of the stream, found the stream, could smell that fresh, clean water, and took some time to have a little drink of the water. Before scurrying along the edge of the water and walking upstream. And as the animal followed upstream, it noticed that the stream divided. In one direction it continued to be smooth and calm. In the other direction it led to some waterfalls. And the little animal decided to follow the calm path for now. And it continued following that calm path. And as it followed that calm path, it could see twigs gently floating past. It could hear birds in the distance and the flow of the water. And as the day continued on and the sun began to set, so the spirit animal found a kind-looking person just sat on a log by the stream. And the animal went over to that person. And the person told the animal to continue following the path, and that at some point this stream would also become rough, would also have waterfalls, and that the animal needs to follow this stream, follow that rough path. And that at the top of that rough path would be a cave, and in the cave would be something to learn from. And the spirit animal felt that this person seemed so kind and friendly and genuine, that they must have something of value to teach and be trusted. So they continued following this stream. And as the sun continued to set and the sky changed from blues to oranges and reds, and the moon began to appear in the sky and stars, the little animal found itself at the foot of a waterfall, and it climbed up the side of the waterfall. It could feel the spray of the water in its face as it climbed higher and higher, and then it climbed up next to the next waterfall and the next waterfall. And it continued to climb higher and higher until it reached the top, where suddenly the water was calm again, and it followed this calm water all the way to a cave. And the little animal walked into the cave and could hear dripping of water echoing through the cave. Could hear the bubbling of the water flowing through the cave. Noticed the stalagmites and stalactites, and continued walking through the cave. And there was glowing rocks in the cave. As the spirit animal continued to explore. And then after a while, they noticed a purple hue just glowing off in the distance. They started walking towards that purple hue. And they walked and walked, going deeper and deeper into the cave, relaxing and feeling calmer, more comfortable. And then deep inside the cave, they found that purple hue. They found what was making the colour. There was what looked like a clock face on the wall. Only the hands were moving fast, and as the hands spun fast, so purple light emanated from the face of the clock. And they stood and watched those hands rotate. And they felt the hands moving their eyes. That the more they watched those hands rotate, the more they felt their eyes rotating. And then they started slowing down the rotation of their eyes, and found that the rotation of the hands started slowing. And they continued watching those hands slow down, and the purple slowed down and yet became more intense and more focused, and they watched that focused purple light as those hands stood still. And as soon as the hands stood still, so they noticed silence. They noticed the dripping had stopped. The bubbling of the water had stopped. The movement had stopped. Time had come to a halt. And they started thinking, and they found that they had more time to think when there was no time at all. They were the only thing seeming to be able to move. And they saw that behind the clock, off to the side, was an exit from the cave. They walked out that exit, gazed out over the land below. They saw static birds in the sky, static clouds, no wind. Just everything lit up by moonlight, with an eerie but calming glow, and a silence. And they focused on the moment, on the silence. They broadened out their senses and relaxed. Then after a while, the spirit animal went back into the cave, went to that clock face, touched the clock face very gently, and the clock began to move again slowly. The dripping in the cave dripped slowly. The bubbling of the water calmly bubbled along. When they exited the cave, birds were flying calmly through the sky. And they learned something about focus and wisdom and calmness and more. And they found their way down into the land below, scurrying and climbing and relaxing down to that land below, following a path through the land, appreciating the birds flying in the sky, the rustling leaves of trees, the movement of grass, how everything in one moment leads to another moment, and that every moment is a present in that moment, and every present is to be cherished. And then after a while, the person in the cave started to become aware that the rain was dying down. And as the rain was dying down, they began to drift back from that reverie of the spirit animal while holding on to the learning. They drifted back from the reverie while holding on to the learning. And as they drifted back, they became aware again of the crackling of the fire, which was now just embers. They became aware of some bird sound as the rain began to clear, and that the sky was lightening and becoming bluer. And as they looked out from this cave, they could see the way the sun was lighting and warming the ground, creating a mist as the water evaporated and the ground dried. And they left the cave and took a deep breath and breathed in the fresh air, where the rain had cleaned the air. And they climbed down from the cave, walked down into some woodland, and walked through the woodland out to the savannah. And they could see that other animals had done the same, all come out into the savannah, gathering around lakes, drinking, making the most of the newly laid down water. Enjoying the warmth of the sun. As they walked around the savannah, thinking about their spirit animal, about what it was learning on their behalf, what it was teaching them, and what it will teach them about how to handle stress and anxiety and change, how to make the most of each moment. Whatever's going on in that moment, and they were aware that there was so much to learn. From the adventure of that spirit animal. And as they walked through the savannah, they went to a huge tree, ran their fingers around the tree, before noticing there's a staircase inside the tree. They walked into the tree and started descending that staircase, going deeper and deeper towards a secret cave underneath the tree. Where an ancient civilization had shared its knowledge and wisdom. And they'd never seen rock so smooth. And they explored this underground labyrinth. And they saw images on the walls, and they could understand those images as images teaching them, giving them wisdom, guidance, new learning about the here and now and future. And they felt a connection between this place, the ancient civilization, and the spirit animal. They knew somehow it was all connected. And they knew that it's only a matter of time for that learning to happen. And after they gained the knowledge, they knew they just needed now to allow that deep part of themselves to integrate what they've read, to integrate all of those images, all of the meaning. But that can only happen by becoming absent-minded, by letting the mind wander. So they leave this ancient place, leave that tree. They travel to a high point. They sit down, cross their legs, gaze out over the view, let their eyes close, focus on their breathing. And begin to let their mind wander, let themselves drift deeper into the experience, while that deep part of them learns and integrates all this knowledge, making sense of it all. Just like when you forget something and you carry on with something else. And although you weren't thinking about it, a deep part of you was. And it solves the problem and gives you the answer, and you get an aha moment where suddenly the answer flashes into your mind. And this person sat there meditating, not trying to do anything, just waiting for the mind, that deep part of them, to do its work, for them to have that aha moment before they'll drift back. And so they meditate, they can hear sounds around them, and gradually the sounds fade away as they become more inner focused, more relaxed, more peaceful and calm. And then they experience silence. And instead of seeing black, they start to see the world around them as if their eyes are open, yet their eyes are closed. They have this sense of being able to stand up and walk around and look around, yet they remain motionless, meditating. And they explore the experience. They know that they can't overthink it. They have to keep judgments out of it, because any attachment draws them in. They can just be an observer on the observation. As the deep part of them gains the inner wisdom, connects the dots, works with the planted seeds, and then after a little while, they feel their eyes opening. Only as their eyes open, so they begin to hear rain again. Only the rain is the sound of rain on a car. And they can see through the windscreen, see the distorted world around them through the rain, noticing the relaxing sound of the rain on the car and on the windscreen, and the warmth of being sat in that car. And after a little while, the rain begins to ease off and eventually stop. And they sit and they look out as the rain clears from the windscreen. And they see the nighttime world, the glow of streetlights, and find there's something relaxing about a peaceful night in a town where there's no movement, just gazing out at the streetlights, at the empty streets, and the occasional car passing by. And having a feeling of having a profound experience this night in this car. and leaving the car, breathing in the slightly cool air, sound of the car door being closed and locked, and having a little walk around the peaceful streets, taking in the calmness, the comfort, peace and quiet, enjoying a moment, aware that if this was 12 hours later or 12 hours earlier, the streets would be busy, noisy, chaotic. But here, now, the streets are calm and peaceful. And then after a brief walk around the streets, beginning to head home, going into the home, and going up to bed, settling down in bed, and beginning to drift comfortably asleep. And while beginning to drift comfortably asleep, drawing on all that you know, all that you've been learning, drifting back to that person thousands of years earlier, and then drifting back through them to the spirit animal and all the learnings they had, and the connection between all three of you, almost like there's a thread, a golden thread connecting all three of you. Like time is an extended chain of events, with each event linked to the next event, going back beyond one life and forward beyond lives, where time is eternal and the connection through time is eternal, and the wisdom profound, with deep insight. And finding this connection leads to a drifting deeper and more comfortable asleep, relaxing, drifting, floating, deeper and more comfortable asleep into the experience, where sleep is the gateway to inner wisdom, to a reality beyond reality, to a time beyond time, to a connection to a universal consciousness and something greater. And while in awe, sleep begins to comfortably set in through the mind and body, just as the rain begins to appear again on the bedroom window. The gentle tapping on the bedroom window of the rain, helping to connect all the dots, helping to guide you deeper and deeper asleep, helping to give that conscious part of you something to focus on while you drift inside and go deeper and more relaxed asleep, finding that sleep happens so easily and effortless in a way that is more profound each time you drift there, with deeper and more profound learnings, knowing that in the morning those learnings will have begun to have an exponentially profound effect on well-being, health and happiness. And so drifting comfortably and relaxed asleep